Many years ago, by random chance, Goldie Roger came across Silver's Rayleigh relaxing on a boat he was living on after his house burned down. But Roger didn't think it was a coincidence. He said this meeting was fate, and although Rayleigh laughed him off, it was hard to deny since they would later become the most legendary duo in the history of piracy. They sailed together on that tiny boat for some time, before eventually arriving at the island of Water 7, where they met the shipwright Tom, who built them the Oro Jackson, a ship designed to circumnavigate the entire Grand Line, which hadn't been done in 800 years. But that was the kind of ambition Roger had, and he didn't care how long it would take. They set sail with the ship and slowly formed a crew, recruiting a decent amount of members, and they went for their dream, to reach the final island in the Grand Line. They picked a route and followed it all the way to the very end until they landed on Lodestar, where no one had reached for 800 years. But there, they realized it wasn't the final island. There was one more, but they had no clues to get there for the time being, so had no choice but to sail backwards. 1 year later, 38 years before present day, they landed on the island of God Valley. This event is shrouded in mystery, but on that day, the Rocks Pirates, the most powerful pirate crew in the world, was defeated by an alliance of the Marines and Roger Pirates. The Rocks crew became fractured and split up, forming their own crews, so the Roger Pirates appeared to be the top dogs in the new world for the time being, and they would add one more member to their crew that day, when they found a red-haired baby inside a treasure chest. They sailed through the oceans, adventuring and enjoying themselves. My theory is they started taking the alternate routes through the Grand Line to see everything the world had to offer, since they couldn't make it to the last island yet. They continued this for 10 years, raising Shanks, the child they found, and taking another one called Buggy. These two got close, but in a very competitive sort of way, so Rayleigh had to constantly break up fights between the two. The Roger Pirates were living their dreams, as Roger had envisioned all those years ago, but unfortunately, Roger found out that he had gotten a fatal illness, and only had a few years left to live. Their dream of piracy and adventure was coming to a close, so they couldn't afford to put off their dream any longer. It was now or never for them to find a way to the final island. They discovered that there were 4 red poneglyphs in the world, that when deciphered and combined would reveal the location of the final island. They snuck into Big Mom's territory to steal one of them, but didn't know where the remaining 3 were. They were stuck, but just when their dreams seemed hopeless, they arrived at an island like any other, where they battled some Marines, but the main event would come after that. The Whitebeard Pirates. Edward Newgate had become Roger's greatest rival, and the two crews had been doing battle on and off for years now, but Roger said that this might be the last time they ever met. But before that, a samurai came rushing towards them. He easily beat a few members of the crew, so Rayleigh was gonna confront him, but Roger stopped him and went for the samurai himself. After this, he clashed with Whitebeard, and the two of them ordered their crews to go into battle. Rayleigh and the rest of the crew fought for the next 3 days and nights, with Rayleigh proving why he was Roger's right-hand man, dealing with every opponent with ease. But eventually, the captains called for a ceasefire, and the two crews started exchanging gifts with each other. The samurai's name was Kozuki Odin, and he, Roger, and Whitebeard started talking in private, but after a while, Whitebeard got angered and started destroying the island because Roger requested to have Odin join his crew. It turned out that Odin was the only person in the world that could read the poneglyphs. In other words, the key to the dreams Rayleigh and Roger had been chasing since they met all those years ago. Whitebeard ended up relenting, and Odin joined the Roger Pirates for their final voyage. He brought his kids along, and Rayleigh reminisced, saying it was like the old days when they took in Shanks and Buggy. The crew traveled all across the Grand Line and started finding the remaining poneglyphs on Fishman Island, Wano, and finally Zo. They landed in a small port town and started deciphering the poneglyphs, and after some time, pinpointed the location of the final island, and Roger ordered them to set sail immediately. And on that day, they learned the entire truth of the world, what the 100-year void was, what the people of the D were, what the ancient weapons were, and, in the face of the vast treasure on that final island, Roger just laughed. And so did the rest of them. They laughed until tears sprang to their eyes. Joy Boy left behind a tale full of laughs, and so Roger decided to name this island that hadn't been reached in 800 years, Laugh Tale. Roger became famous worldwide as the King of the Pirates, and Rayleigh became known as the Dark King, the shadow and right-hand man of the King of the Seas. The Roger Pirates were now cemented in history. They'd done it. Roger and Rayleigh came from the simplest of beginnings, and together they achieved everything the world had to offer. It was a legendary story, but for Roger, that story was ending. Roger gave them all his gratitude for the long and incredible journey they shared, and disbanded the crew. When he got off the ship, he said something to Rayleigh, which brought him to tears, then waved goodbye and walked off. They would meet again once more, and Roger told Rayleigh he wouldn't die, and that was the last time Rayleigh would see his best friend. Roger turned himself into the world government and was executed, and even though the entire world was watching, Rayleigh couldn't bring himself to go. But on that day, Roger changed the world, spurring on the greatest age of piracy in history. There was no other day where Rayleigh laughed as much, and there was no other day that he cried as much, or drank as much. His friend truly lived an incredible life, and he celebrated it. After this, Rayleigh went on adventures on his own. He had to learn how to live without his oldest friend who'd been by his side for more than half his life, so he was lost and had to find a way to spend his time. During these travels, he was shipwrecked, but was found and saved by a young fishman named Haki, and they became close friends after this. He then met Haki, the Empress of Amazon Lily, and together with the former Empress, they took in 3 girls who had been enslaved by the Celestial Dragons and recently freed by Fish Tiger. They looked after them during their most vulnerable period. After that, Rayleigh and Haki got closer, and eventually got together. She owned a bar at the Sabayori archipelago, so Rayleigh joined her on the island. He was now officially retired from the pirate life, and it was time to settle down, so he needed a new purpose, and decided to pick up ship coding. Sabayori archipelago was a necessary stop for any pirate looking to go into the second half of the Grand Line, and in order to do so, needed to get their ship coded to go underwater to Fishman Island and come back out on the other side. So Rayleigh learned how to code ships, which had the benefit of allowing him to be able to keep an eye on the generation of pirates that Roger spurred on. He spent the rest of his time at bars and gambling halls, just enjoying himself and relaxing. Years passed, and one day he met Shanks again. He was all grown up, but shockingly he lost an arm, along with the straw hat that Roger had given him. Rayleigh asked him what happened, and Shanks smiled and started telling him about a boy he met in the East Blue that said the exact same thing that Roger did, and how he sacrificed his arm to save the boy, and passed on Roger's straw hat to him. And Rayleigh took note, hoping to one day meet this boy, Monkey D. Luffy. He continued to enjoy his retirement, drinking and gambling, leaving home for months at a time, going all over the lawless areas of Sabayori, and when he would run out of money, he would resort to selling himself into slavery to pay off his debts, only to escape and restart the cycle over and over again. During one of these times, he saw a mermaid being abused by the slave auctioneer, so knocked him out with Conqueror's Haki. He proceeded to break out, freeing his fellow slaves and stealing the money people had paid for them. He went to the auction stage, where he spotted Hachi. He was really glad to see him again after so many years, but realized he was injured and asked what happened, but quickly put the pieces together and understood the situation. Hachi had been shot by a celestial dragon, only for someone to step in and knock out the celestial, and that man was none other than the one he wanted to meet, Monkey D. Luffy. He said that the straw hat that he'd seen for decades, first on his best friend ever since their first meeting, and later on Shanks, fit well on him, a compliment Luffy didn't fully understand. Rayleigh then grabbed onto a collar that was attached to the mermaid he saw earlier, and everyone was terrified. The collars were designed to explode if someone tried to take them off, but Rayleigh told the mermaid to stay calm. It began to beep, signifying it would explode, but he ripped it off and threw it out of harm's way. Everyone was shocked and impressed, with the rookies recognizing him as a legendary Dark King, but he replied that now he was only an ordinary coding craftsman, and was an old soldier that only wanted to live in peace. He went to Hachi, and he confirmed that he wouldn't die from his injuries, then thanked Luffy for saving him. He asked Rayleigh why he wanted to see him, but he said they would talk later, and first needed to get out of there. The building was surrounded by Marines, and since the Celestial Dragon was assaulted, a Navy Admiral was on his way to capture Luffy, but as young pirates do, the rookies insisted to prove themselves, and go outside to confront the Marines. So, Rayleigh picked up Hachi and told the Straw Hats to meet him at Grove 13 if they got separated. They made their way out of the building, and the 3 captains had already cleared out the Marines, and Rayleigh laughed. They must have reminded him of his younger years as a pirate, and as he ran through the active battlefield, he continued to laugh, reminiscing about those times. He ran with the Straw Hats back to Shaki's bar and started treating Hachi's injuries. After they got settled, Rayleigh revealed who he was, to the shock of Luffy. He started recapping his time on the Roger Pirates, and rejoicing over how Roger changed the world with his final moments, and that those that were there to see it got something special from Roger. He told Luffy that Shanks was part of the Roger crew, and he told him all about Luffy, and that was why he wanted to meet him ever since then. He then said that he would coat their ship, and would do it for free, since he would never charge a friend of Hachi's. But then, Nico Robin asked him if he knew the secrets of the world, and he said that yes, the Roger Pirates learned everything on Laugh-Tale. But he warned her to not get ahead of herself, and to take things one step at a time. They and those at Ohara were too hasty. Even if he told her everything, right now there was nothing she could do about it. The answer she arrived at could be different from theirs after she saw the entire world at her own pace, but if she still wanted to know, he would tell her everything. But she smiled and took his advice of taking things slowly. He gave his condolences for what happened at her home of Ohara, but he told her that he was sure that she would see everything someday. He was then asked by another Straw Hat if the One Piece was really on the final island, but Luffy screamed out, refusing to hear it, saying it would ruin their adventure if they knew the ending. Rayleigh asked Luffy if he thought he could do it, conquer the oceans of the New World, but he responded that he didn't want to conquer anything. The one who is the most free is the Pirate King. And Rayleigh smiled, knowing this boy really was something special, and Shanks was right, he was just like Roger. Rayleigh then said he'd get started on the coding, and gave Luffy his Vivre card to ensure they could find each other again. But shortly after, Rayleigh must have gotten worried about the Straw Hats, so went to check up on them, and was able to block a deadly blow from the Admiral Kizaru from killing Luffy's first mate Zoro. He told the Admiral that the Straw Hats' era was just beginning. Luffy took the chance to run and thanked Rayleigh for helping them, and he wished them good luck. Kizaru again tried to attack them, but Rayleigh picked up a sword and again blocked him. It had been over 20 years since Rayleigh got into a serious fight, but he hadn't lost that many steps, even as an old man. Still though, his opponent was one of the 3 powerhouses of Navy HQ, so he could barely hold him off in his current state. The warlord Kuma then arrived, and somehow made Zoro disappear. Rayleigh wanted to go and help them, but had his hands more than full with Kizaru, but Kuma was the one that came to him. He told him that he was a leader of the Revolutionary Army and wanted to help the Straw Hats escape. Rayleigh was hesitant to believe him, but Kuma responded that was up to him, and proceeded with his plans, making every single Straw Hat disappear, transporting them to different islands. So many things happened after this, but it culminated in a war between the Whitebeard Pirates and Marine HQ plus the 7 warlords. The trigger was the capture and scheduled execution of Portgas D. Ace, Whitebeard's second commander, and also Roger's son. It's unknown if Rayleigh knew Roger had a son during the last year of his life, but now he was set to be killed, and the Whitebeard Pirates fought their hearts out to rescue him, along with Luffy, who had become Ace's brother during their childhood. But in the end, it wasn't enough. Ace and Whitebeard died, and Rayleigh watched all of this from Sabayoti, shedding a tear, as another member of his era passed on. After this, Haki told him that Luffy might have been taken to Amazon Lily after catching the eye of the current Empress, Boa Hancock, so Rayleigh listened to her intuition and made his way over there. He had first gotten a boat and started sailing to the island, but it sunk in a storm, so he swam the rest of the way there, even through the calm belt, killing every sea king that got in his way. Luffy was brought out to meet him, and the 3 sisters he saved long ago came as well, and he said that they all grew up to be beautiful and strong since they last saw each other. Then, he got down to the reason he swam all the way there. He asked Luffy if he was going back to Sabayoti, and he emphatically said yes. He promised to meet his crew back there in 3 days' time when they were separated, but Rayleigh reminded him what happened to them on that very island, and that meeting now would only cause that to repeat. So, he had a suggestion, and Luffy ultimately agreed. Rayleigh, Luffy, and Jinbei made their way to Marine HQ, the location of the biggest war in the past few decades that just took place a few days before, but it was all for a very specific reason. Rayleigh's plan was to get Luffy on the front page of every newspaper, get the eyes of the entire world on him, to relay a message to his crew. On Luffy's arm, he wrote the phrase 3D2Y, meaning 3 days and 2 years. The crossed out 3-day part, signaling to Luffy's crew, the only people in the world who could understand the message, that they would meet back up in 2 years instead of 3 days, implying that they would all use that time to get stronger and prepare for their journey into the new world properly. Rayleigh was probably the most experienced pirate alive at this point. Him and Roger sailed for over 3 decades, most of that being spent on the Grand Line, so he knew the ins and outs of this stretch of the ocean and what was required to actually survive on it. And the final part of his plan was to pass that knowledge on to Luffy. They went to Ruskaina, an uninhabited island near Amazon Lily, full of gigantic powerful beasts, the ideal training spot. He told Luffy that there were 500 animals stronger than him, and he better get stronger quick if he wanted to sleep well at night. Luffy asked how he knew these things, and he said it was Haki. Luffy didn't know much about Haki, but Rayleigh had been using the power for so long it was as natural to him as breathing at this point. He explained the basics with some demonstrations, ending in by knocking out a gigantic elephant. Luffy was in awe, saying the Pirate King's crew could take down a monster like that without even touching it. Rayleigh laughed and continued telling him more about what he'd teach him. Rayleigh was excited and having fun. In a way, being with Luffy made him feel like he was with his best friend again, so he enjoyed their time together, but that didn't mean he would go easy on him. He was strict and ruthless with his training methods, but Luffy listened to him and never gave up no matter how tough it got. Luffy surprised him at times, looking at the world in completely unique ways, inventing brand new abilities that only he could. But maybe that was what made him such a quick learner. So quick in fact, he didn't even need the full 2 years to learn the basics, and was done in 1.5. So Rayleigh left him to finish his training on his own to sharpen his skills, and went back to Sabaody to wait for him and the rest of his crew. He finished coding their ship, and they arrived one by one. They had all gotten so much stronger, and he said he couldn't wait to see how much Luffy had grown in the past 6 months. A lot was happening on Sabaody though. There was a group pretending to be the Stryads, and they got the attention of the Navy, who were mobilizing all over the island as a result. But Rayleigh said that Luffy was on the island now, so they didn't have to stay around for much longer. He told the Stryads to meet at Grove 42, and that things might get rough, but it was time to put the past behind them and start anew. Rayleigh made his way over to where Luffy was, to see how strong he'd gotten. Luffy sensed him and called out to him. He was impressed with the progress he made over the past 6 months, and told him to hurry to his crew. Luffy thanked him for everything he'd done for him the past 2 years, but Rayleigh laughed and said there was no need for formalities now, and to hurry up and go. But Luffy had a message for him. The Marines then started gunning for Luffy, and he started running, waving goodbye to Rayleigh, and he started thinking back on the 1.5 years they spent together fondly. He yelled out to Luffy to go all the way to the top, then took out his sword and drew a line in the ground, telling the army of Marines in front of him that it was his student's farewell, and he wanted it to be proper, so advised them not to cross that line. When Luffy left for Fishman Island, Rayleigh reminisced on his very first meeting with Roger, and shed a tear, saying maybe there were no coincidences in this world after all, and that Luffy had become a man even more worthy of Roger's hat. Rayleigh continued keeping tabs on his student and his crew through the newspapers, but he kept active in other matters as well. He and Haki sailed to Amazon Lily when it was under attack by the Marines and the Emperor Blackbeard. Boa was able to freeze most of her attackers with her fruit, but Blackbeard grabbed her by the neck, nullifying her powers. But just then, Rayleigh arrived, and apologized to Boa for being late. Everyone was shocked to see a legend in the flesh, with Blackbeard being terrified to his core, and Rayleigh's reputation and aura alone were enough for him to broker a peace deal to have everyone leave Amazon Lily. When they left, Rayleigh said they got lucky. He was 78 years old now, and was almost certain he'd lose to Blackbeard in a fight at that point, but he was able to use his reputation for good, to keep the girls he saved and looked after years ago safe once again. And that's where Rayleigh's story is left off at the moment. Rayleigh is a unique character. He's had an entire lifetime worth of adventure that deserves his own full story before One Piece even began. We only get glimpses of it, but even if we don't get to see all his grand adventures with the crew and Roger by his side, I think it's just as beautiful to see an old man who's lived his life to the fullest and truly had a great time. Now be able to relax, spend the time he has left how he wants to, and guide the next generation. He lost his best friend, who he spent his entire adult life with, and got separated from his crew who were like family to him. For years he was lost, but he was able to find new people who he formed bonds with, and has been able to have a different but equally joyful life in his old age. In a story full of tragic endings, it's nice that the Dark King is able to have a peaceful one.